Jackie, I think one of the things that makes Song of Songs stick out, aside from its content, as we've discussed, is like it's even as poetry, and there's plenty of poetry in the Bible. Song of Songs has some pretty striking imagery.
So we have a lot of imagery here of fecund landscape in spring, intertwined with body parts flying around everywhere, and it is not surprising that liturgically in Judaism this work is read
At Passover.
At Passover, right? The New Year, one of the New Years, right? We just have all these different New Years, but we won't get into that.
Not today.
Not today. So I think one of the clearest aspects of this poem, or ideas that this poem deals with, is beauty. So we have this idea of passionate, maybe this is anachronistic to say, but romantic love, at the same time as you see desire expressed in terms of beauty.
So let me ask this, a couple of things based on what you just said. One is, as we know, the Bible tends to be generally very bad at descriptions of bodies.
Well, we just don't really know what a lot of our characters look like.
Song of Songs, I would have to say, is probably the most expansive, exploratory. I mean, there's no fuller description, even if it's piecemeal, of the human body than in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think
book.
in other texts we hear way more detail about fantastical creatures than we do about human characters. And here we actually get really striking visuals. It's not just the passerby sort of like, and her eyes were weak or whatever is going on.
Right,
Leia,
or even Joseph is like very, very nice looking.
Right, or like
or
Saul,
David,
or like Saul seems to be like really appropriate for the basketball team.
Right, Absalom is beautiful from the tip of his head to the tip of his toes, but we don't.
But that's, I mean, and actually to that point, right? That description of Absalom's beauty as being from the top of his head to the tip of his toes is the same kind of expression of beauty that's used in Song of Songs to describe the woman, but it actually goes from the top of her head. Well, it lands somewhere in the middle of her breasts, but maybe somewhere else, as some have thought. But I want to read this because I think it's a great example of one of the distinctive things that Song of Songs does. This description of beauty, and almost nowhere else do we know like what are the standards of beauty or the ideals. You are fair, my darling, you are fair. Now, fair, I wouldn't translate it like that. I'd say the Hebrew is more like you are beautiful, just sort of as like a plain term, or fitting, or in the British fit, but we won't go there. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats streaming down Mount Gilead. Don't use that in a bar to pick someone up. Your hair is like a flock of goats. You wouldn't think that that is, on the face of it, a compliment. But it actually is a really stunning visual if you think about it, right? Just cascading curls, right? With endless movement. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes climbing up from the washing pool. All of them bear twins, not one loses her young. She's not missing any teeth.
Which had to be, honestly, like radically rare.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. You're looking great, right? Your lips are like a crimson thread. Your mouth is lovely. Your brow behind your veil gleams like a pomegranate split open. Your neck. Now we get into really like, this imagery is now kind of shifting into military imagery, and one might ask why. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built to hold weapons, hung with 1,000 shields, all the quivers of warriors. She's wearing a necklace, right? It's like you really have to think about like what this imagery is, the picture that it's painting. And it's very deliberately painting a picture. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle, browsing among the lilies when the day blows gently and the shadows flee. I will betake me to the mount of myrrh, to the hill of frankincense. Scent, we may call them pheromones. Scent plays a really significant role in the whole sensory description of desire and lovemaking in Song of Songs. So again, right, you have this this image of beauty, and you see this again elsewhere, right, with a description of man. I can find it here. These compliments of the woman's body repeats over and over again throughout Song of Songs. It's interesting that the woman's beauty is described as free of blemish, right? That is what is beautiful or perfect, right? That's perfection, blemish-free. Clearly what we're looking at is a very ableist society, and the ideals of a very ableist society. It is interesting that when the man is described for his beauty, it's not that all of him is beautiful, there is no blemish in him, but rather, and actually that's how Absalom is described. He is described as desirable, right? All of him is desirable. And so again, we return to the theme of the woman's desire as being central here. And I find that really interesting, especially in light of the allegorical reading of it is Israel's desire for God, that like through that lens, thinking about how this is a kind of model.
Yeah, so what's unique, certainly super fascinating about this is that it is a female-centered sexual discourse, which, I mean, we think of, it's not so much for all of the Bible's like stuff about sex. There's not so much, but like it's almost always, it's almost always context of inheritance or laws. I mean, there's always some male aspect to it.
I will ask a question. How many times in the biblical narrative do a man and a woman have sex and there not be an actual pregnancy that resulted out of it?
Right. I mean, exactly. I mean, and so to that, it's almost as if
it's a plot device, right?
But it's also almost as if like what's being said is right when men, right, sex for men has all these other things going on, right? There's all these other things that need to be worried about.
There's inheritance, there's lineage. I mean, if we were to follow the biblical story, that desire is not, does not first come to mind when you think about.
And the few times it does, it's not great. I mean, the ones that come to mind for me are like Amnon and Tamar, not good.
No. David and Bathsheba,
not good. Joseph and his master's wife.
Right. So
which is maybe the only other time I can think of female sexual desire being narrated.
Yeah.
Which makes this book radical.
Yeah, it is radical in a sense. One thinks about with curiosity the fact that some may think that it can serve as some kind of like biblical guide to sexuality in this sense, because it just the speakers don't seem to be married. I mean, there is a sort of like a marriage scene, but clearly this desire is all taking place outside of the context of a home and a family. And the woman's desire is front and center. And so for all of these unusual dimensions to it, I think that it can only but within the context of the corpus be read through the kind of allegorical reading that comes about.
Yeah. It occurs to me exactly what you just said, which is this, one could read this as a guide to, like, the Bible's guide to sex and romance. And that's precisely why, especially the more traditional you get as a community of reading, the more allegorical it gets.
Yes.
Because the further away from that kind of, just to speak broadly about traditional readings, the further away from that kind of female-centric desire you can get, the better.